She carried the wounded through 4 years of war. The Alpha King did not know her name. I want to be honest about what I was before she made me see. I ran a war. I ran it from the command chamber above the underlane, from the stone table where the shafts were numbered and the personnel were categorized, and the daily protocols kept the kingdom's machinery moving through 4 years of siege. I knew every asset in Kale done by classification. I knew the eastern shaft's load-bearing tolerances, the root hub's ventilation cycles, the number of oil lamp reserves in each alcove along the 11 shafts of the underlane tunnel network. I could tell you, without consulting a ledger, how many wolves we had moved through the lower passages in any given week, how many had come up and how many had not. I did not know her name for 63 days. That is the thing I keep returning to. Not the war, not the siege's length or the tactical maps or the decisions I made from above the ground while she made her own decisions below it. I return to 63 days, and I count them, and I feel the weight of each one pressing down on me like the stone weight of the shafts she worked beneath. The shafts I had numbered but never entered, the tunnels I had named but never walked, the personnel I had categorized as expendable support staff, and assigned no names to in any ledger I kept. 63 days. She had already kept 17 wolves alive who should have died before she appeared in my first report. 17. And I had read that report and written in the margin, adjusted casualty projection, eastern sector, and moved on. I want to be honest about that too. The underlane was not built for beauty. That should be said plainly. It was built for war. 11 shafts driven into the bedrock beneath Kale Dun Fortress in the 3rd year of the Varith siege, when the eastern approaches became impassable above ground, and we needed a way to move the wounded and the supply lines without losing both to the Ashmark formations that had locked down the outer ridge. 11 shafts, connecting at the root hub, which was the widest point and the only one with enough ceiling height to stand fully upright in if you were not me. I was told it was comfortable. I accepted this on faith, having never descended. The personnel assigned to the underlane were classified in 4 tiers. Combat Wolves 1st tier, Command Liaisons 2nd, Essential Maintenance 3rd, Expendable Support Staff 4th. She was 4th tier. I want to explain the protocol because it matters. The Expendable Support Protocol was not cruelty for its own sake. It was a mathematical instrument, a siege management tool. When a shaft destabilized, the 4th-tier personnel nearest the collapse zone were assigned a holding designation. They were expected to remain in position long enough for the critical assets above them in the classification to be evacuated. They were not expected to survive. The protocol had a name, the Holding Order. I had signed it in the 2nd year of the siege, because the War Council had placed it before me and the tactical logic had been sound, and I had not, at that moment, been thinking about the particular faces of the people who fell under the 4th tier. I had been thinking about the shaft load-bearing tolerances. I had been thinking about the eastern approaches. I had been thinking about winning. Her name was not on the holding order. Her name was not on any order. She did not exist in the ledgers I kept. She existed only in the Eastern Command Report's Field Healer, unassigned, a designation that appeared with increasing frequency beginning 63 days before the Eastern shaft fell, and which I had read in each instance, and understood only as a statistical note. I need to say this plainly because I have had 4 years since the courtyard naming to consider it. I was not a cruel king. I was a blind one. There is a difference. I am still learning in the years since whether blindness of that particular kind is a more forgivable sin than cruelty, or a less forgivable one, because at least cruelty knows what it is doing. The first report that carried her designation reached me on the 41st day of the current campaign, which was the 432nd day of the Eastern Siege overall. It was the 3rd item in the Eastern Command briefing, below a note on the Ashmark formation shift and a supply ledger adjustment for Shaft 7. The note read, Survival rate critical patients Eastern Alcove, 79%. Prior period, 61%. Field healer unassigned assigned to alcove rotation for the past 19 days. No pack affiliation, no wolf blood on record. I had read that note. I had written, survival rate noted, reassess Eastern critical care allocation in next period, and moved to item 4, which was a ventilation fault in shaft 9. My war master, Aldrich Vane, had looked at me when I set the report down and said, quietly, that 79% in the Eastern Alcove was not possible with the resources currently assigned there. He had said it as a man who had spent 3 years watching the Eastern numbers and had learned what to expect from them. He had said that someone was doing something down there that the numbers could not account for. I had told him to note it in the next allocation review. He had looked at me for a moment longer than was necessary. I had not asked why. On the 53rd day, I descended into the underlane for the first time. It was not for her, I want to be clear about that. It was because Shaft 7's ventilation fault had propagated into Shaft 8, and the maintenance tier had flagged it 3 days running, and I had decided that morning that the command chamber's picture of the eastern sector was no longer sufficient, and I needed to see the load-bearing structure of the root hub myself. This was a tactical decision, a war management decision. It had nothing to do with the field healer, unassigned, whose survival rates had been appearing in my briefings for 12 days, and who had by that point kept 29 wolves alive that my prior projections had marked as non-survivable. I descended Shaft 3, the central access. Aldrich came with me and 4 of the Eastern Command officers. The underlane smelled of lamp oil and stone and something underneath, something I recognized distantly as the scent of blood cleaned away, again and again, until the stone itself carried the faint memory of it. The ceiling was low. I was told it was comfortable. I had been told correctly. The root hub was wider than I had expected. The lamps were well maintained. This surprised me. The maintenance allocation for the underlane was, I knew from the ledgers, the minimum sustainable. Someone had stretched it. Someone had stretched it considerably. Aldrich led me east toward Shaft 4 and the alcove. He did not say anything. He had the manner of a man leading his king somewhere specific without being asked to, which was a manner I had seen in Aldrich only twice before in 4 years, and both times it had meant something. I heard her before I saw her. Not her voice. She was not speaking. What I heard was the sound of the Eastern Alcove working, the low, precise sound of someone moving in a small space with complete knowledge of that space, the sound of hands that had learned their work to the point where the work no longer required thought, only the faint rhythm of competence. I had heard that sound before. I had heard it from my best tacticians and from my best weapon masters and from Aldrich himself, on the days when the command chamber's logic was running cleanly, and every piece of the war's machinery was turning in the right direction. I had not heard it from the underlane. She was at the far end of the alcove, kneeling beside a wolf who had been carried in from the eastern approach 3 hours before with a shaft timber through his side. There was a lamp at her left hand, positioned with the particular deliberateness of someone who has learned exactly where the light needs to be. There was a supply rack above her that had been reorganized. The original maintenance arrangement had grouped supplies by category, but she had rearranged them by frequency of use, which was not standard protocol and which was also, I saw immediately, considerably more efficient. There was a list on the wall beside the rack, written in very small, very precise letters, tracking each patient by shaft and alcove assignment and current status. I had never issued that list. The Eastern Command had never issued that list. She had made it herself from necessity, because without it she could not have tracked 29 patients across 11 shafts with the resources she had been given. She did not look up when we entered. The wolf on the ground was breathing. That was the first thing I registered. He had been entered into the morning's casualty projection as non-survivable. He was breathing. She finished what she was doing with the bandaging, 2 more passes, a knot that she tied without looking at her hands, and then she sat back on her heels and checked the patient list on the wall and made a small mark beside one entry. And then she looked up. She was not what I had built from the reports. I had built nothing, in truth. I had not built anything at all from field healer, unassigned, because I had not thought of her as a thing that could be built. She had been a designation. She had been a survival rate anomaly. She had been, I understood in the moment she looked up at me, a person who had been working in my kingdom's lowest tunnels for 63 days while I sat above the ground and managed the numbers. Her eyes were dark and very still. Not the stillness of surprise, she was not surprised that I was there, which told me that the underlane's communications ran faster than the formal chain. She had known I was coming. She had not stopped working. She looked at me the way someone looks at a variable that has arrived in their problem earlier than expected, but that does not fundamentally change the work. She said, "My Lord King, I'd ask you not to stand too close to the lamp. The alcove's running low on reserve oil, and I can't waste the light." Behind me, Aldrich made a sound that I chose not to examine. I said, "You reorganized the supply rack." She said, "The original arrangement assumed someone would always have time to search for what they needed. In the eastern alcove, there is never time to search. I hope that is not a problem." I said that it was not. She turned back to her patient. My wolf went quiet. I need to be precise about this, because the quietness was not a sound, and it was not an absence of sound. It was not the alert stillness of a predator or the held-breath tension of approaching danger. It was the particular quality of attention that comes when something that has been searching, not consciously, not with intention, but searching the way a body searches for balance, finds what it was searching for and stops. The cessation of a motion, so habitual it had become invisible. My wolf had been moving restlessly for 4 years of siege. I had thought this was the war. I had thought the war's constant demands were what kept that low interior motion going, the turning of a compass needle that could not fix on north because north kept shifting with the tactical situation. I had named it vigilance. I had called it command. It stopped in the eastern alcove, watching her make a mark on a patient list she had built herself from necessity. I did not name it then. I was not ready to name it. I looked at the supply rack, at the patient list, at the wolf on the ground who was breathing when he should not have been. I said to Aldrich that I wanted the 4th-tier allocation for the underlane reviewed in the morning's briefing. Aldrich said that he would arrange it. We left the eastern alcove and walked back through the root hub and up shaft 3, and I felt the quiet thing in my chest going on being quiet with the particular stubbornness of something that has decided to stay. I did not ask her name. I am still ashamed of this. The eastern shaft began to show fault signs on the 61st day. It was the geological structure beneath the Ashmark Ridge. The Vareth engineers had flagged a slow lateral shift in the bedrock 3 weeks into the current campaign, and it had been logged and assigned a monitoring frequency, and placed in the maintenance queue behind the shaft 7 ventilation issue, and the root hub ceiling repair, and 6 other items. The underlane had 11 shafts and 1 engineering team, and a maintenance allocation that was the minimum sustainable. We had known, when we built it, that the eastern shaft was the most structurally vulnerable. We had accepted this because the eastern shaft served the highest casualty approach. On the 61st day, the morning report flagged a stress fracture in the eastern shaft's primary load-bearing column. The engineering team marked it as serious. The War Council convened. The tactical calculus was not difficult. The eastern approach could not be abandoned, which meant the eastern shaft could not be closed, which meant the personnel currently in the eastern shaft had to be assessed by tier. The holding order crossed my desk on the 62nd day. It was the same protocol I had signed 2 years before, the same instrument, the same mathematical logic, the same tiers. The 4th-tier personnel nearest the collapse zone, Field Healer Unassigned, The Eastern Alcove. I read it. I sat with it for a long time. The tactical logic had not changed. The Eastern approach still could not be abandoned. The shaft was still destabilizing. The higher-tier personnel still needed to be moved first. The War Council's analysis was correct. I had signed this same instrument 2 years before, and the mathematics had been sound then, and they were sound now. I read it again. I thought about the lamp, positioned with the particular deliberateness of someone who had learned exactly where the light needed to be. I thought about 29 wolves who were breathing when they should not have been, marked on a list she had built herself because the war had not thought to build it for her. I thought about the quiet in my chest, the compass needle that had stopped moving in the eastern alcove on the 53rd day and had not moved since. I thought about 63 days. I picked up the holding order. I tore it in half. I have been asked since the courtyard naming whether this was the moment I knew. The War Council asked me in the review afterward. Aldrich asked me, years later. I have asked myself on the nights when the fortress is quiet and there is nothing but the lamp and the sound of her breathing. The honest answer is that I knew before I tore it. I had known since the 53rd day, when my wolf went quiet and did not move again, when I had stood in the eastern alcove and watched her work by lamplight and felt the cessation of 4 years of restless searching. I had known and I had not acted on it because I had not been ready to name it. And I had not been ready to name it because naming it would have required me to look at 63 days and understand what they meant, and I was not, at that moment, ready for the weight of that understanding. I tore the holding order because I could not send her below the ground to die for a protocol I had signed without thinking about the faces it described. And then I picked up the lamp from the command table, and I went to the eastern shaft myself. Aldrich followed me. The 4 Eastern Command officers followed Aldrich. No one asked where we were going. The direction of my steps made it plain, and 4 years of command had taught the officers that a king moving with that particular velocity in that particular direction was not a king who needed consultation. The eastern shaft had deteriorated in the hours since the morning report. I could feel it before I could see it, the particular quality of the air, the fine stone dust that drifted through the lamplight, the sound the column made that was not quite a groan and not quite silence. The engineering team had marked the fault line with chalk at shoulder height. I walked past it. The alcove was ahead. She was there. I had expected, I do not know what I had expected, evacuation perhaps. Compliance with the protocol she would not have been told about officially, but that the underlane's internal communications would have carried within the hour. Fear. Something. She was treating a patient. There were 3 patients in the alcove, not one. She had moved 2 additional wolves in from the corridor when the morning report broke. I learned afterward, because the corridor positions were the first to go in a shaft collapse, and she had known this and had done the math herself. 3 patients, 1 lamp and her. The alcove ceiling had a new crack in it since the 53rd day. She heard me come in. She looked up. This time there was something in her expression that was not there on the 53rd day. It was not fear. I want to be specific about this, because I have thought about it many times and I want to name it correctly. It was not fear. It was the expression of someone who had made a calculation and reached an answer and was prepared to live inside the answer without asking for it to be made easier. She said, "My Lord King, you shouldn't be in here." I said, "I know." She looked at the patient under her hands and then back at me. She said, "There are 3 of them. The tunnel above shaft 7 is still stable, if I can keep them." I said, "I have torn up the holding order." The alcove went very quiet. One of the Eastern Command officers behind me made a sound. Aldrich did not make any sound at all. She said, "My Lord King." I said, "I don't know your name." A pause. The eastern shaft made its sound, not quite a groan, not quite silence, but something between them that was the stone's way of saying what it was becoming. She said, "Myra, my name is Myra." And then the marks burned. I want to try to describe this accurately, because I have described it imprecisely in the years since, and I would like here to be exact. It was not pain. I should say that first. It was not pain, though burn is the word that comes to me, and that came to me in the moment. It was heat, the particular heat of something that has been cold for a very long time and is now, at last, the temperature it was always supposed to be. It came from inside the wrists, both of them simultaneously, and it was the mark of the bond. The fated mate bond, the oldest thing in wolf kind, the thing the War Council had stopped expecting to see on their king after 4 years of siege. She looked at her own wrists at the same moment I looked at mine. The marks were identical. They were not a design I recognized, not a pack mark, not a royal sigil, not anything from the lexicon of bonds I had read about in the histories. They were theirs, the bond's own language, specific to the two of us, which is the nature of the mate marks when they come from the true bond and not from the lesser connections that sometimes imitate it. The marks were hers and mine, and they had waited, apparently, for 63 days. 6 Eastern Command officers witnessed this. Aldrich witnessed this. The 3 patients in the alcove, 2 of whom were conscious, witnessed this. No one spoke for a moment. Then the eastern shaft made its sound again, louder, and everyone moved. The evacuation of the eastern alcove took 11 minutes. I know this precisely because Aldrich timed it, which was the kind of thing Aldrich did, and reported it to me afterward as 11 minutes and 23 seconds, which was 14 seconds faster than the engineering team's projected minimum for the 3-patient configuration. She directed it. I want to be clear about this. I was present, and I was physically capable, and the Eastern Command officers were efficient, but she directed the evacuation because she knew the alcove's configuration, and she knew the patient's conditions, and she knew which order the transfers needed to happen in so that the most critical patient moved last because moving him first would have killed him. She had mapped this. I learned afterward, in the first week she was in the eastern alcove, because she had looked at the shaft's geology and the alcove's position and had understood, months before the engineering team flagged it, that the eastern shaft was eventually going to do exactly what it was now doing. She had been prepared. I had not known her name for 63 days, and she had been prepared. The eastern shaft's primary column gave way 7 minutes after we cleared the alcove. The critical patient chamber held the alcove's independent load structure, which she had reinforced with materials she had sourced from the maintenance surplus and installed herself during the first month of the campaign, held through the shaft's collapse and kept the chamber intact. The 3 patients survived. The wolf I had seen on my first visit, the one who had been breathing when he should not have been, was one of them. She told me this afterward in the root hub, with stone dust still in her hair, and the mate marks still new on her wrists. She told me in the same tone she had used when she told me not to stand too close to the lamp, which was the tone of someone reporting a variable that had resolved correctly, as though she had known all along that it would, if the work was done right. I thought, standing in the root hub with the eastern shaft sound still settling through the stone around us, that she had probably known for months, the way she had known the shaft's geology and the alcove's load structure and the patient's evacuation order. The way she knew everything that needed to be known down here, in the tunnels that the command chamber above had numbered and managed and never entered. I said, "How long have you been in the under lane?" She said 4 years. I came in with the 3rd engineering wave when the eastern approaches closed. I'm not, she paused, and I saw something move across her expression that was not quite discomfort and not quite apology, but something adjacent to both. I don't have a pack. I don't have wolf blood. I know the protocol puts me in the 4th tier. I've always known that. I wasn't expecting the bond. She looked at her wrist. I wasn't expecting a lot of things. I said 4 years. She said yes. I said, "You've been here for 4 years. She looked at me with the patient expression of someone who has already confirmed a fact and does not require it to become a conversation. "Yes," she said again. I thought about the survival rate in the eastern alcove. I thought about 29 wolves. It was 32 now. I had done the count in the shaft, who were alive because she had reorganized a supply rack and built a patient list from necessity, and reinforced a load structure with surplus materials no one had asked her to use. I thought about 4 years in the fourth tier, in the tunnels below the tunnels, working by lamplight while I sat at the stone table above and managed the numbers. I said, "I should have known your name on the first day." She said quietly, "You had a war to run." I said, "That is not an absolution." She looked at me for a moment, then she said, "No. I suppose it isn't." And there was something in this, in the precision of it, the refusal to let me off the hook, but also the refusal to make it a wound, that was, I realized, exactly consistent with everything else I had seen from her. She did not give more or less than the situation required. She gave exactly what it required, whether that was a lamp positioned precisely for the light or an honest answer to a king who was asking for one. My wolf was quiet, had been quiet for 10 days. I thought it might be quiet for the rest of my life. I thought I would like that. The War Council met that evening. The eastern shaft collapse altered 3 tactical projections and required a supply line reroute through shafts 6 and 8, which was not ideal but was manageable. The engineering team began stabilization work on the remaining 10 shafts. The medical allocation for the underlane, the resource base that had been the minimum sustainable for 4 years, was revised upward, effective immediately, with my signature on the revision before the council meeting was halfway done. Aldrich said nothing during the revision. He had the expression of a man who has been waiting for something to happen for a long time and is choosing not to make too much of the fact that it is now happening. The War Council's senior officer, a wolf named Harvin who had served 3 campaigns before mine, looked at the revised allocation and then at me and said, with considerable diplomatic restraint, that the 4th-tier review would presumably also be on the agenda. I said that the 4th-tier category was dissolved, effective that evening, and that the personnel formerly assigned to it would be recategorized on a competency basis, starting with a full review of the Eastern Sector's actual survival data. Harvin looked at the data Aldrich had placed in front of him and was quiet for some time. Then he said, 32 wolves, my Lord King. I said yes. He said, the eastern alcove's load structure reinforcement held through a primary column collapse. I said yes. He said, the 3rd Engineering Wave's personnel record includes a field healer, no pack affiliation, no wolf blood, assigned to the underlane on the... He checked the date, 41st day of the current campaign, before which she appears to have been in the eastern sector, continuously for. I said 4 years. Harvin set down his ledger. He looked at me for a long moment. He said, I would like to have known her name earlier. I said so would I. The courtyard naming was my doing, not hers. She did not ask for it. She would not have asked for it. Asking for it would have been inconsistent with everything I had come to understand about her, which was that she did not ask for things she did not think she had earned, and she had a very particular accounting system for what constituted earned and what did not. She had saved 32 wolves. She had reinforced a load structure that held through a shaft collapse. She had directed an evacuation in 11 minutes and 23 seconds. She considered these things the work, and the work was what she had been there to do, and the work being done was the whole of what she had thought she was owed in return. She was wrong about this. I intended to tell her so for the rest of both our lives, but I began in the courtyard. The assembled war host numbered 460 wolves. They had gathered for the morning command briefing, a standard assembly, nothing ceremonial in the arrangement. I had sent word ahead only to Aldrich, who had positioned himself at the edge of the courtyard with the expression of a man who had decided not to be surprised by anything else today, and was finding this difficult to maintain. She came out of the underlane access point at the eastern edge of the courtyard, which was the access she always used, which was the access I had chosen deliberately because it was her access, not mine, and I wanted the naming to happen where she worked, not where I did. I walked to her. The war host went quiet in the way that 460 wolves go quiet when their king is moving with purpose towards someone they do not recognize, which is a particular quality of silence, not alarmed, not disapproving, but attentive in the specific way of beings who have learned that when their king moves like this, it means something is about to become true that was not true before. She looked at me coming toward her across the courtyard, and she did not step back and she did not look away. She looked at me the way she had looked at me in the alcove on the 53rd day, the way she had looked at me every time, the particular way of someone who has assessed a variable and reached an answer and is prepared to inhabit the answer without requiring it to be made smaller or easier for her comfort. I had learned in 10 days that this was simply how she looked at the world. I had decided in 10 days that the world was considerably better for being looked at this way. I said, in the hearing of 460 wolves and the 6 Eastern Command officers who had already seen the marks and had spent 10 days saying nothing to anyone, which was a loyalty I intended to acknowledge properly. Her name is Myra. She has served this kingdom's wounded in the underlane for 4 years without recognition and without rank, and she has kept 32 wolves alive who would otherwise not be alive, and she reinforced the Eastern Alcove's load structure on her own assessment and her own initiative, and that structure held when the shaft fell and kept 3 critical patients alive through the collapse. She carries the mate mark of the bond. She is the Alpha King's fated mate. She is Luna of Vareth. I have thought about what I wanted to say in that courtyard, in the 10 days between the tunnel and the naming. I had written several versions of it in the margins of the morning briefings, which Aldrich had observed without comment. What I said in the courtyard was not any of the versions I had written. It was simply what was true. I have found in the years since that the true thing is almost always the shortest version, and that the shortest version is almost always the one that lands. The courtyard was silent for a moment. Then 460 wolves, who were tired and siege-worn, and had been fighting a war for 4 years in a kingdom that was still standing largely, because someone they had never been introduced to had been keeping the eastern sector's survival rates at 79% from an alcove below the ground, bowed. Not for ceremony, not because I had commanded it. They bowed because Harvin had said, in the command tent the night before, that the eastern alcove's reinforcement had held through a primary column collapse, and that information had moved through the war host the way information always moves through a body of wolves who are fighting the same war fast and complete, and with the accumulated weight of 4 years of siege behind it. They had been in the underlane. They knew what the eastern alcove was. They knew what a primary column collapse meant. They knew what 32 wolves meant. In a campaign that had been costing wolves at a rate the eastern approach had made unsustainable before she arrived. They were not bowing to the title, they were bowing to the work. She stood very still while 460 wolves bowed to the work she had done for 4 years, without anyone knowing her name. Then she looked at me. She said quietly, "You didn't have to do it in front of everyone." I said, "Yes, I did." She thought about this for a moment with the particular precision she brought to every question, and then she gave a small nod that meant, "Variable assessed, answer accepted." The Myra station was carved into the rebuilt alcove by the Eastern Command officers, not by my order. I had not ordered it. I had not even known it was happening until the shaft reconstruction report came across my desk with a notation at the bottom, in Aldrich's handwriting. Eastern Alcove designated Myra Station by command team. Alcove notation carved above the lamp hook, operational lettering, standard maintenance notation style. She has been told. She asked them to leave the patient list space intact. I had read this and then read it again, and then set it down and sat with it for a while. She was asked about it afterward. She told me, the evening the notation was filed, that she had told the command officers it was unnecessary, and they had told her, with considerable collective firmness for a group of wolves talking to their new Luna, that it was entirely necessary, and would she please stop arguing about the lettering style. She said she had found this difficult to know how to feel about. I told her that they were right. She said they did it without being asked. I said I know. She looked at her wrists, at the marks that were no longer new but were still, I thought, something she was working out how to carry. She had carried other things for a long time without anyone noticing, the lamp positions and the patient lists and the load structure math. And she was learning slowly that it was now permissible for the things she carried to be seen. She said 4 years is a long time to be in the 4th tier. I said, yes, I'm sorry. She looked at me with the directness that I had come to understand was simply how she met the world. She said, I know you are. I believe you. And then, because she was always precise, she added, that's not the same as saying it was fine. I just want you to know that the two things can both be true. I said that they could. The siege of Vareth ended 14 months after the courtyard naming. The Ashmark formations withdrew from the eastern ridge in the final campaign, and Kael Dun held, and the Underlane's 11 shafts were decommissioned one by one as the eastern approaches reopened above ground. The tunnels were kept. There was some discussion of closing them entirely, of returning the bedrock to unworked stone, of letting the Underlane go back to the darkness it had been pulled from when the war made it necessary. The War Council presented this option to me in the first peace period meeting. I asked Myra what she thought. She said the Underlane's load structure was still sound. She said the alcoves had ventilation now that they had not had before. The maintenance had improved them over 4 years in ways that made them, structurally speaking, better than they had been built. She said the lamp hook positions were better than standard in 6 of the 11 shafts. She said she thought it would be a waste to close them. I told the War Council to maintain the Underlane in operational condition. Aldrich filed the order. Harvin looked at the order and then at me and then did not say anything, which was, I had learned, his version of approval. She goes below some mornings still. Not to work. The Underlane is a reserve facility now, maintained but unstaffed, the patient lists gone and the supply racks in their original arrangement. She reorganized the supply racks in the 3 most used alcoves shortly after the decommission, which I only know because a maintenance wolf mentioned it to Aldrich, who mentioned it to me, with the expression he always uses when something is so completely consistent with everything he already knows that he is not sure why he is reporting it. I told him to let her arrange the racks however she chose. He said he had already noted that. It is quiet in the Underlane at this hour. This is the thing people do not know about it who have not been below. They know it as a war tunnel, 11 shafts, the root hub, the eastern alcove that held when the shaft fell. They know it as the Myra Station, which is what the command team called the alcove, and what the designation on the wall above the lamp hook says, in operational lettering, standard maintenance style. They know it as the place where the bond ignited, which the 6 Eastern Command officers have told and retold with the particular enthusiasm of witnesses to something that is already historical while they are standing in the middle of it. They do not know it as quiet. She does. I found her here this evening in the Eastern alcove, the Myra Station, the rebuilt one, with the new ceiling and the original patient list space still intact on the wall. She was checking the lamp oil. This is not her responsibility. The maintenance schedule handles it. She checks it anyway. The way she arranged the supply racks, the way she built the patient list and reinforced the load structure, and positioned every lamp with the particular deliberateness of someone who has learned exactly where the light needs to be. I sat down on the floor of the alcove, which is not a thing that Alpha Kings typically do. The ceiling was comfortable. The lamplight was sufficient. Outside the alcove, the eastern shaft was a corridor again, rebuilt, sound, no longer counting toward anyone's casualty projection. She finished checking the lamp and made a small notation on the maintenance slip and sat down beside me. She said, "Oil's well stocked." Someone on the maintenance rotation actually followed the schedule for once. I said, "I'll pass that along to Aldrich." She said, "Don't. He'll make it a commendation and then there will be a ceremony and I'll have to stand in it." I said that I would keep it to myself. She leaned against the alcove wall. The mate marks on her wrists caught the lamplight. They were ordinary now, familiar. The marks of a bond that had had 4 years and 14 months of siege, and then 14 months of peace to settle into being simply part of her, part of both of us. She did not look at them the way she had looked at them in the root hub in the first days when they were new and she was still finding out what they meant. She looked at them now the way she looked at the lamp oil, with the calm attention of someone taking inventory of the things that are in their right place. I thought about 63 days. I do this still sometimes. Not with the weight I used to carry, not with the particular pressure of counting each one. I think about them now the way you think about a road you walked badly in the dark when you are now in daylight, aware of the missteps, able to name them, no longer in danger of taking the same wrong turn. I said, "I had your patient list mounted in the command chamber. Did you know that?" She said, "Aldrich told me. I thought it was strange." I said, "It's where I should have started, looking at the actual names." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You looked eventually." I said, "That is not the standard I want to hold myself to." She said, "No, but it's where you are, not where you were." She paused. "That's something." This, I thought, was exactly the kind of answer she gave. Not more or less than the situation required. Not absolution, but not cruelty either. The honest account of where things stood, offered with the same precision she brought to the lamp positions and the patient lists, with the calm of someone who has looked at a variable and reached an answer, and does not need the answer to be anything other than what it is. The underlane was quiet around us. The kind of quiet that has been earned, not the silence of absence but the silence of a place that has done its work and been allowed to rest. The eastern alcove was lit and steady. The lamp oil was well stocked. The maintenance schedule had been followed for once. I thought about 460 wolves who had bowed in a courtyard to the work, and about the Eastern Command officers who had carved a name above the lamp hook without being asked, and about Aldrich, who had not said anything when I revised the 4th-tier allocation, and about Harvin, who had said I would like to have known her name earlier, and about a war that was over and a kingdom that was standing, and a tunnel network below a fortress that was maintained and quiet and better than it had been built. She was the variable that had changed the calculation. She had changed it for 4 years before I understood it, and she had changed it again in the eastern alcove on the 53rd day when my wolf stopped moving and did not move again, and she had changed it in the root hub with stone dust in her hair when she gave me an honest answer about 63 days, and declined to let it be either a wound or an absolution. She would go on changing it. She would change it tomorrow morning when she reorganized a supply rack in a maintenance corridor no one else was paying attention to. And she would change it the next day when she added a notation to a maintenance slip that no one had asked her to complete. And she would change it for the rest of the time there was time to change it. Because she was who she was, and I had understood, in the alcove on the 53rd day, that who she was did not require the war or the crisis or the marks to make it visible. It had always been visible to anyone who had looked. I had not looked. I looked now. She glanced at me sideways, the way she did when she had assessed a variable and reached an answer but had decided not to say it aloud immediately, which was a look I had catalogued in the 14 months since the courtyard naming and which I had come to find, privately, one of the better things in my life. She said, "You're going to tell Aldrich about the lamp oil, aren't you?" I said, "I am going to tell Aldrich about the lamp oil." She sighed, the precise sigh of someone who had already projected this outcome and found it marginally within acceptable parameters. The underlane was quiet, the lamp was steady, the mate marks on her wrists caught the light and held it. I had not known her name for 63 days. I intended to spend the rest of my life making the accounting come out right.